These are the notes for Algebra 1, Lesson 1-3, Properties of Numbers. The objectives are: recognize the properties of equality and identity, recognize the commutative and associative properties. Let's start with the vocabulary. First of all, equivalent expressions. Expressions that denote the same value for all values of the variables. Reciprocal, the multiplication inverse of a number. Next, I need you to go to your handouts and find the number properties chart. Today we're going to focus on all of these except one, and we're going to add one to our properties chart. Let's start with commutative property. If it's of addition, then all it does is switch the order of the numbers or the variables, and for multiplication, it switches the order of the numbers or variables. For the associative property, for addition, we keep all of our variables or numbers in the same order. It's just the parentheses that change place. Here they're with the last two variables, and here the parentheses are with the first two. And the same for multiplication. We're keeping the order, but we switch the variables. Next, we have multiplication property of 0. That means any number times 0 equals 0. We're going to skip the distributive property for now. Go down to the bottom, and we have additive identity. That means any number plus 0 will give you that number. We also have multiplicative identity. Any number times 1 equals that number. Additive inverse. If you add positive and negative numbers and get 0, that's additive inverse. Multiplicative inverse. If you have a fraction and you multiply by its reciprocal and you get 1, reciprocal and inverse are the same. So multiplicative inverse will always give you 1. Next, we're going to look at one that was not on here, and I need you to add it. It's called substitution. Anytime you're simplifying an expression, and on the next line you simplify an operation, we're going to call that substitution. These are all rules that we use in order to simplify and solve problems. Let's go on to example 1. The directions say evaluate and list the property used in each step. This goes back to the lesson that we had for 1-2, where you have to use the order of operations. So let's start with our parentheses. We're going to do one operation at a time. So in parentheses, we have 12 minus 8, which is 4, and that is simplified. Over here, we have 15 divided by 5 minus 2. Division comes before subtraction, so this becomes 3 minus 2. Bring down the rest of the information and continue. We need to tell what property did we use to simplify these parentheses and begin simplifying these parentheses. We are going to call that substitution, and you can just write SUB period. Now let's look at what we need to do next. According to the order of operations, we need to finish up our parentheses. So this now becomes 1, and we need to bring down the rest of our information. And what did we do? But we took this operation and substituted a 1 for it. So this becomes substitution. Next, we have multiplication. If we work from left to right, let's do this one first. 1/4 times 4 gives you 1. Bring down the rest. And what property did we use to get 1? Well, if you look, we're multiplying here, so it's some kind of multiplicative property. And what multiplicative property says if you multiply reciprocals of each other, you get 1 multiplicative inverse. Let's do our second operation, which is multiplication. This becomes 3. And we just used a multiplicative property. Which multiplicative property on your chart says if you multiply a number times 1, you get that number? That rule is multiplicative identity. And you can abbreviate these as long as I can tell that what you mean. We don't want inverse and identity to look alike. So now we have 1 plus 3. Simplify that and you get 4. There is not an additive property that tells us if we add 1 to something, we get the next number. So this is simply substitution. Now let's go on to example 2. Maria made a list of trail lengths to find the total miles she rode. Make the total mile, or find the total miles Maria rode. Basically, what we're wanting to do is we know that to find the total of something, you're going to add it up. But you have been taught to rearrange numbers so that you can make groups of 10. So let's look at what we have. I think of this in terms of money. I know that 25 cents plus 75 cents make a whole. So I want to regroup this to put these two numbers together. So I'm just changing the order. 425 plus 775 plus 650 plus 9. So what did I do by changing the order? We're going to call this commutative property of addition. All I did was switch the order around, and you can have COA to represent commutative property of addition. Now I want to group these. These two I want grouped together because I know they make a whole. And then I can group the last two together. They don't make a whole, but I at least have one set of numbers that will make a whole. Now, by putting parentheses in here like this, I'm showing you what I want to add together. I did not change the order, but we're still adding. This is called associative property of addition. Now let's go ahead and simplify. 425 plus 775 is 12. 650 plus 9 is 1550. And all we did was substitute what we simplified. So we're going to call this substitution. And then add these two together and you get 1750. And what we are doing is substituting 1750 for this operation. So again, calling it substitution. And if you're watching carefully, you can see I made a mistake. It's 12 plus 1550, and that should give us 1750. And this was not money. If you go back and look at the math problem, they're talking about miles. So the total number of miles was 27.5 miles. Now let's go down to number 3. On number 3, we have a simple problem that wants us to find the value of x and name the property used. If you multiply these two numbers together, you get 1 equals x. And there is a multiplicative property that tells us if you multiply the reciprocals, then you will get 1. And we call this multiplicative inverse. You will notice there is not an example 4 on your paper, but there's a large blank space underneath the objectives where we can write down this problem and simplify. We are going to have to name the properties as we go. So let's get started. With order of operations, we're going to start with parentheses. We have multiplication and subtraction. When you think about the order, multiplication will come first. So we have 8 minus 8 inside of our parentheses. Bring down the rest of it. Continue in parentheses. 8 minus 8 is 0. Now this says subtraction, and we don't have any subtraction properties. But let me ask you something. Could I change this to addition and then make this a negative 8? Have you ever heard of keep, change, change? Now if you look at this, it reminds me of an additive property that we have, where you add the opposite, and we can also call that the inverse. So if you add the inverse, this is called additive inverse. And I'm going to bring down the rest of my problem. According to order, are we going to do multiplication or addition first? Let's do multiplication. And now we have 6 plus 0. And all we've done is substitute 6 for 2 times 3. So we're going to call this substitution. And when you add 0, you get 6. Is there a rule or a property that says when you add 0 to a number, you get the same number? I believe this is called additive identity. I have one more that I would like for you to write into your notes. This again is not listed, but underneath the chart about the miles, you will have a little bit of room to do example 5. We're going to evaluate this by using properties. Sometimes when you are given a whole bunch of numbers and you want to do the same operation, again, you want to try to make groups of 10. So I'm going to rearrange this so that I can make a group of 10. And to me, I see that 5 times 2 is going to make 10. So I'm going to rearrange this to put the 5 and the 2 together. And then I'll have the 7 and the 4 together. Rearranging this order of multiplication is called the multiplicative property of, let me try that again. We're gonna call this commutative property of multiplication. Now that I have that, I'm going to look and see what do I want to group together. Well, I set it up so I could group together the 5 and 2 and the 7 and 4. So if I write this again, 5 times 2 and 7 times 4, all I've done is put parentheses in here, but I haven't changed the order. So this is the associative property of multiplication. Now I'm going to simplify. 5 times 2 is 10. 7 times 4 is 28. And we've simply substituted numbers for these operations. Now we've made it easy because we're multiplying by 10. All you have to do is take the 28 Since we're multiplying by 10, put a 0 on the end. And again, this is substitution. This is the end of lesson 8.3. You have an assignment to do in Google Classroom, which will be due at the end of the hour.